Hello, students, and welcome to Mr. Sandwich Reads. I am, as always, Mr. Sandwich. Today I'm going to be reading the biography of Sojourner Truth by Gwenyth Swain. And when I first really got into reading, which was roughly about the 7th grade, I was a little late to really start delving into books. But when I did, it was really with biographies. And I did notice a few months ago I posted a reading of Shirley Ann Jackson, a little biography on Shirley Ann Jackson, and that's been very well received. So here I am back at it, reading more biographies. I do really enjoy biographies. When I first started reading, like I said, it was really musicians and athletes, and I'm just always interested in other people's lives. Still am, and I know you are too. So let's get on into it. Isabella. Isabella was born about 1797. People called her Belle for short, but there was nothing short about her. She grew tall and straight like her father. He was called Boomfree, the Dutch word for tree. Belle's mother was called Mama, Dutch for mama, and Bet, short for Elizabeth. Belle had many brothers and sisters, but only brother Peter lived with her and Boomfree and Mama. Belle's family didn't own the house they lived in. They didn't even own the hard cellar floor they ate and slept on. Instead, Charles Hardenberg owned Belle and her family. He owned them just as he owned the big stone house in Hurley, New York. He owned them just as he owned a flock of sheep. He owned them just as he owned his long-tailed coat and wide-brimmed hat. Belle and her family were his slaves. They were Dutch-speaking slaves. They lived in what was the Dutch part of New York State. Winters were long there. Ice coated the nearby Hudson River. Summers were short there. But on warm nights, the stars shone bright. Belle and Peter saw them shine. When they sat outside on their parents' laps, Mama and Boomfree were tired after working for Master Hardenberg. Belle and Peter were tired too. Even young slaves worked. But they weren't too tired for stories. Boomfree told stories of all his lost babies. Those older children belonged to other masters, far from Hurley. They had been sold years before. Belle knew them only from stories told at night. Belle's mother told stories too. "My children," she'd say, "there is a God who hears and sees you." Belle loved to hear Mama tell of God who lived in the sky. "He will always hear and help you," Mama said. Belle thought about Mama's friend God after Master died. Farmer John Neely bought Belle and some sheep from the Hardenbergs. Someone else bought Peter. Mama and Boomfree were too old to be worth money. They were left to live on their own. They had no place to work or live. Belle hardly ever saw them because she was so busy. She was only 9, but worked hard all day long. She tried her best to please her new master and mistress, but they spoke only English. Belle knew only Dutch. She never understood half the things she did wrong. She never forgot the beatings they gave her to make her do right. Belle talked to God when she thought Master Neely couldn't hear. She wasn't sure if God heard her. But one day, a man asked to buy her. This new master made her work harder than before, but he didn't beat her. He treated her well enough that Belle decided God had listened. Finding freedom. When Belle was 13, she was sold to another master. Master John Dumont was proud of his young slave. She did the work of a grown man. Soon she grew as big as a man, standing nearly 6 feet tall. Belle was still a teenager when her first child, Diana, was born. Master Dumont was pleased. The baby was his property, to keep or sell. Babies Peter and Elizabeth soon followed, making Master even happier. Then, Belle heard the news about freedom. It was coming for slaves in New York State. There you see her and her children and her baby. Pretty awful that they'll just be sold. It's treated like property, like cattle. They would be free on Independence Day, 1827. The law said so. Once Belle knew freedom was coming, she couldn't wait. In 1825, she asked Master if she could have her freedom a year early. Master agreed as long as Belle worked hard. That year, Belle did her usual work unusually well. Any predictions here? You may want to pause. You think Master Dumont here is going to make good, letting Belle go a year early? She bound the wheat and loaded Master's wagon. She washed Mistress's clothes and cooked the meals. She sheared the sheep and spun the wool into thread. The time came for Belle to be free, but Master changed his mind. Belle had shown how much she could do. How could he let her go? Belle loved truth almost more than freedom. It hurt that Master had lied to her. It hurt to see her own Independence Day pass and still be a slave. Belle did what Mama told her to do years before. She talked to God, who lived in the sky. With God's help, Belle made up her mind. She wouldn't wait for Master to free her. She wouldn't wait for the state of New York to free her. Belle rose early one crisp morning when the leaves were turning color. She didn't wake her older children. She hoped to come back for them soon. She carried her new baby in one arm. In the other, she carried a sack of clothes and food. Before Master awoke, Belle slipped away. She found freedom. Finding a new name. Belle didn't know it, but she was on a long journey. For a time, she lived in New York City and worked as a maid. But Belle didn't want to be a maid forever. She dreamed of showing others how to talk to God. She dreamed of being a preacher. It was hard to preach if you couldn't read the Bible. Belle had never learned to read, no matter how she tried. The letters all got mixed up, she said, and I couldn't straighten them out. She asked grown-ups to read her the Bible. They read the words and told Belle what they meant. Belle wanted to make up her own mind. She asked children to read the Bible to her. Children never told her what to think. So she doesn't like the interpretations that are given to her. So she goes to the children instead, who just read it and leave the interpreting to her. By 1843, Belle was more than 40 years old. She was ready to preach. She took a ferry to Brooklyn, New York. Along the way, she found a new name to fit her new life. A sojourner is a person who goes from place to place. God, Belle believed, told her to call herself Sojourner. Because, she said, I was to travel up and down the land. But free people had two names. While she was preaching in Long Island, she chose the last name Truth, because, she said, I was to declare truth to the people. And there you see on her way to Brooklyn. Most folks thought women belonged at home. Most folks didn't think a slave was worth listening to. But Sojourner Truth had a strong voice and an even stronger faith. She gathered crowds around her. While she preached, the world changed. By 1850, slavery had ended in the North, but it was still strong in the South. In the South, slave families were still being torn apart. Slaves were still being beaten. Slaves were still dreaming of freedom. Some people in the North tried to help. They spoke out about the horrors of slavery. They demanded that slavery end. Most speakers were white people, but not Sojourner Truth. She talked about how it felt to be a slave. Sojourner brought the truth about slavery to crowds across the land. She talked about the sting of Master's whip on her back. But she didn't cry at the memory. She stood tall and proud. She wore a plain dark dress and wrapped her head in a clean white turban. When she spoke, Sojourner Truth made people think and sometimes laugh. She also sang songs about God. In every day of trouble, she sang, I'll raise my thoughts on high. Maybe others could say it better, but no one said it quite like Sojourner Truth. Life is a hard battle anyway, she told a friend, and if we can laugh and sing a little as we fight the good fight of freedom, it makes it all go easier. It's good advice, even today. Traveling on. Sojourner Truth traveled thousands of miles, speaking against slavery, but slavery wasn't the only wrong she saw. Free women, black and white, weren't treated as well as men. Free women could not vote in many states. They could not own property. They were paid less than men for the same work. Soon, Sojourner was speaking out for women's rights. And that uneven distribution of pay still goes on. Many men said women were weak and shouldn't be paid as much as men. But Sojourner Truth raised her arms and showed off her strong muscles. "I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed," she said. "And can any man do more than that?" No matter where she was, Sojourner fought for people's rights. In Washington, D.C., horse cars would not stop for black passengers. That didn't stop Sojourner Truth. She ran after the cars. She yelled until they had to stop. She and others forced the horse cars to stop for all passengers. When she rode down the streets of Washington, Sojourner didn't look at buildings and monuments. She looked at the people in the horse cars. "The insides of the cars," she said happily, "looked like pepper and salt." It's different people, different shades sharing the horse cars. Mine are salt and pepper. Not every battle was so easy. Slavery did not end until a long and terrible war nearly tore the country apart. Women could not vote until 1920, long after Sojourner Truth had died. Women are still sometimes paid less than men for the same work, but setbacks and sorrows never stopped Sojourner Truth. Here you see women casting their vote. In 1857, she bought a little house of her own to share with her grown daughters. But Sojourner still kept on traveling and fighting. The going was not easy. The road she traveled was long and hard. But until she died, Sojourner Truth brought truth to the people. So there you go, the biography of Sojourner Truth. It does show us a picture on the back. You do see Sojourner Truth. Very early photo. It does say here the afterword. I'll read this. It's worth reading, just a page here. Sojourner Truth was an extraordinary woman. In her time, few women spoke in public, and almost no former slaves gave speeches. Few whites in the North or the South thought black slaves had much to say. After all, slaves like Sojourner Truth were uneducated. But Sojourner Truth never let her sex, her lack of education, or the color of her skin stop her. And by being unstoppable, she was an inspiration to people in her time and ever since. Sojourner Truth lived before radio or television, so we can only imagine what she sounded and looked like as a speaker. But those who heard her were overwhelmed by the simple power of her words, her tall form, and her good humor. "I don't read such small stuff as letters," she once said. "I read men and nations." Sojourner Truth may well have had a reading disability, but she was a great reader of people. Whenever she spoke, she shared what she had learned about people as a slave and as a woman, and she urged her fellow Americans to fight the good fight of freedom, justice, and fairness, one step at a time. And I love that we've just started the school year here. It is September. And one of the conversations I had is what is reading? What do we read? It's not just text and print anymore, nor really has it ever been. We read body language, we read faces, we read a lot of visuals with words. So that was something I had my class discuss a little bit. And we see here the power of the different reading, being aware of your surroundings, critical thinking. And Sojourner Truth had all those things. This was a biography. I did get this from my local library, and they were able to order it within the same system, the same library system. So this actually came from across the lake here, but my local library was able to borrow it from another library. It's called Interlibrary Loan. I don't know how many libraries across the nation do that, but I know ours does. So encourage you, if you don't have a library card already, get a library card. October's coming up. I love scary movies, and I'll be sure to place some holds on some movies at my library. But it's not just good for that. It's good for all sorts of things. So please, You can check out more biographies at your local library. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I hope you certainly enjoyed. That was Sojourner Truth, and all right, take care. Thank you. Peace.